I will call tonight's operation meeting to order. And the first business item is elect the committee chair. Not it.
Okay.
One second. All in favor? Aye. Sir, you can vote for yourself.
Aye.
All opposed, okay, hearing none, motion carried. I'll turn it over to Nick.
I need to get. It's my first time running the tower. So welcome to the operations committee meeting. We go to the agenda here. We elected the chair, motion to approve the October 8th, 2024 minutes.
So move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those against? Okay, moving on to our first discussion item, outdoor spaces. If you could take it away, Superintendent Degler.
You bet. So good evening, everybody. Welcome back from our little hiatus away. So we have our operations committee meeting tonight and then a relatively short regular meeting with not much on the agenda, but we are excited to talk to you tonight about outdoor spaces. I know Chase is going to give a little intro here, but we have folks from the physical plant facilities team with us, and Ben's going to do some of the heavy lifting here for us on the presentation. But I'll let Chase make a couple comments and then we'll get rolling.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Good evening. We are happy to talk about this type of topic. I think it's one that really plays a tremendous part in what we do as a district, and we don't spend a lot of time to it. And I always learn something when I hear Ben give this presentation. I also know, well, at least for me, maybe not for others, it's tough to brag on myself. And so I thought I would spare Ben. I moved the slide to the end of his presentation. But you'll see the next to last slide kind of highlights some of the awards we've gotten for our grounds care over the last decade. And so as we talk about this, I just like you to keep that in mind, understand that we are operating in a very high standard, not one that we just set internally, but one that's been recognized at the state and the federal level for the work that we're doing. So off the top, just a kudos to Ben, Jeff, and their team. And that's the last thing I would say. We wanted to make sure we got this presentation in because despite our best efforts, Jeff has told me under no circumstance will he stay with the district past February 15th. That's actually our secret of why we've taken so long with the middle schools, is just to keep Jeff. I'm kidding. That's a joke for anybody listening to the recording. But Jeff was kind enough to stay around with us for a bit of time as we brought those to a close. But he is going to step away and enter retirement, which he said he's going to do a while ago. Ben and Jared, two of our managers from the physical plan, have agreed to step up and take on a little bit more responsibility here this spring as we go through the COO process. And so you've seen Ben present a couple of times. Jared's been around, hasn't presented as much, but these two guys are going to do a great job stepping in and helping fill the large void that Jeff is going to leave. We can talk more about that as we get further in the spring, but with them here, I wanted to mention that. And with no further comments, I'll turn it over to Ben.
So this is actually exciting to present. Most of the time, I call them to present. It's not that big picture. I set this granular level. So today we're going to try to give an overall picture of grounds. Four main topics: grounds maintenance. We're going to get into kind of the approaches we take to managing grounds and kind of the philosophy behind it. We'll get into the playgrounds. We'll kind of update you on our progress on universal design playgrounds, as well as we got a little bit of pre-play stuff there too. Outdoor classrooms is the hot topic right now. That's one I'm probably most excited to talk about because there's so many people and students and staff and faculty involved in those. And then dive into athletic fields, which I don't remember if I've really presented in the 10 years I've been here. So grounds maintenance, we have different approaches that we take to managing grounds. One of the big underlining ones is the principles of universal design. This would be familiar to you for playgrounds, but we try to apply that to grounds whenever possible. And that goes to like picnic tables and rest areas next to benches and so forth. Within grounds, we actually divide grounds up in four primary maintenance levels. There's a little bit more than that, but those are big ones. And we're going to talk about that in a second. The way grounds is really viewed as laboratory space, like lab space, like you would at college. So prior to coming to the school district as an adjunct instructor and manager up at Kirkland Community College. And my job was actually to establish and get those laboratory spaces up and running for educational purposes. And I remember vividly when I got here, Jeff liked that idea and he encouraged us to do that within grounds. We've kind of taken involved in running that. So grounds, you might hear me say this every once in a while. We got two primary categories, hardscape and softscape. And you can think of hardscape as benches and playground equipment and parking lots and things of that nature. Softscapes, if I throw that out there, that's the plant material that we deal with. Within grounds, we kind of have to balance of efficiency and aesthetics as well as usability, because you know, in the classroom generally stays a classroom. You might change what age is in there, but you don't really necessarily tear down walls regularly, place them or whatever. But we can kind of balance those depending on what our objectives may be within grounds. So the primary categories that we have is we have A, B, C, and D. A levels are really your high profile areas, and think of this as intensity of maintenance, right? How advanced turf maintenance or how advanced is the plant maintenance that actually happens in that space, as well as the frequency. So our A levels would be like our athletic fields, like the main entrance to the ESC, the super high profile areas. B areas is a step down from there, but it requires a high level of safety associated with it. So think of the spaces around playgrounds, the areas that crowds can see if they're sitting on the bleachers, and so forth. C areas represent kind of the large area of turf that's kind of out of sight, out of mind, for the most part, and not necessarily really physically, but kind of metaphorically speaking. So if you're familiar with Weber, be a C area that's kind of out north of there, kind of open field space. And then D areas are those super low profile areas that really don't serve a whole lot of education function, but are there. It's kind of the puzzle pieces to the big picture. So this picture I've used over and over again over the years because it illustrates a number of different A, B, C, D level areas. To summarize, your field is A area. Around the bleachers is actually B area. The area behind the team benches and that is a C. And a D once you get down over the hill, and we actually have prairie in here as well as in the area. So just kind of a visual reference so everybody understands what we're talking about. So each of these would actually have a different level of maintenance and we'll adjust those depending on your needs. So playgrounds, path to improvement. Life cycle started in 2014. At that time, our playgrounds, I think it was something like 75% of them were out of date, past the life expectancy or completely obsolete. So for the past 10 years, it's about replacing those playgrounds as well as adding pre-K playgrounds into each of the schools. So as of last year, we finished out our last pre-K playground at Horn Elementary. So they now all have one. We are looking at supplementing those to make sure that they match the student population that we're expecting to have using those in the future. Action paths is something that doesn't get a whole lot of attention. It's kind of a category of hard surface games. Action path itself is really designed for students to be able to interact and create a game together. So it's a path where say just run for a little bit, skip for a little bit, hop for a little bit, and so on around the actual playground. Phase 2, we're going to be really for the next 10 years diving into those playgrounds that happened early in the life cycle that maybe didn't have the same level of universal designs incorporated into those playgrounds. We're going to be supplementing a lot of playgrounds over the next several years. Obviously, outdoor classrooms are getting implemented. If you dive deep down into the weeds of universal design, you'll actually find where it recommends having plant material and art tables and music instruments and tactile vegetation and things of that nature. So that's kind of rounding out that goal of creating universally designed playgrounds. We do random testing of the playground surfaces. I actually call the front desk and I say, give me 3 different playgrounds and I have no control over it. And then we send those off to a third-party engineer to test those, make sure that we're meeting ADA compliance as well as head attenuation, which is going to impact in playgrounds. So we absolutely are an industry leader when it comes to playgrounds. The industry is catching up. There's some amazing playgrounds I visit with my kids that are high dollar, but within schools, I've yet to really see anybody matching what we're doing here. So I think we're on the right path. To the left side of the screen, I'm gonna point this out because this gets into the universal design for those that aren't super familiar with it, but really it's kind of a philosophy that is, you build a playground that caters to students of all ability levels. And you're looking to develop, not just those physical attributes, but also cognitive, as well as, social skills and things of that nature. And so the way that breaks down from an education standpoint, the first item up there is physical and motor skills. Everybody knows, is familiar with that. Social, emotional, tactile. And so it's creating a really well-rounded playground where a student can develop the skills that they need, which is a part of normal human development. And so there's items in there that are meant for solo play, parallel play, cooperative play, group play. And this kind of principle extends itself all the way up through the actual athletic fields and as the kids get into middle school and older. And so a big part of universal design is having a graduated challenge of things. So think of this in terms of a little kid has a wide balance beam that's a foot wide, and then the next one's 6 inches wide, and then the next one is separated by a gap that they have to actually balance and step across there. So outdoor classrooms, this is the part that I'm really excited about. We started implementing these in 2021, mostly speaking, with FMP 2.0 funding. What we did was we went out to Shive-Hattery and asked them to come up with a concept of what outdoor classrooms would look like. They had previously done this work with another school. And then we take that framework and we get together with the actual schools in the same way that we do with the playground committee. So it's a mix of faculty and staff and PTO members. And we figure out how that space is actually going to be used. And so depending on what school you go to, there's an emphasis in different areas. So some of them might be more gardening, some of them might be more artwork or interactions with the students. And so it actually varies as you go across there. But a lot of that was, we were trying to keep STEM in mind when putting these together. So the playground is actually built by a whole series of people. It's not just grounds department, we don't necessarily contract it all out. We do a lot of coordination between what's happening in the school and within the curriculum of the school and trying to incorporate that back into the classroom. And I'll touch on that in a second. We're projected to finish in 28, 29. These things take a very long time to actually build because we have so many parties invested into it and into the construction line. We are amongst the leaders within this. I know there's other schools that have outdoor classrooms. I couldn't say that we are the absolute leaders in it, but I know that we're amongst the leaders in it, sure. So those STEM related things, so students, when we go to build these classrooms, we come up with a concept and the students help plan the material in there, the activity tables, we have drawing tables, we have tactile tables, we have loose parts table, we have easels. Those are actually all built by our high schools. And then our carpenters go in and kind of touch it up and look for any sort of safety hazard and make sure the integrity of the tables are intact. And then we actually do the installation. But those classes actually reverse engineer these. So we actually send a prototype out to those high schools, and the students' objective is to actually reverse engineer that and construct those tables that go into the classrooms. So something that's very cool. Shade shelters currently, for the most part, are built by our carpentry department. Tim Chambliss and Boots and Chris Press are the ones that are kind of lead up that charge. We are going to have students build the first shelter this year at City High. They built bike shelter last year. They're going to build the shelter for their outdoor classroom this year. So we do things like time the construction of this to match up to what's actually happening in the classroom. So City High, for example, the industrial tech teachers, they wanted to have the students go out and see the entire progression of this project. So we actually timed that so that way we were starting to do the prep work when they went into class, and then the concrete was actually poured, formed up and poured. When it coincided with what was actually going on in the activity. So students could see that entire process and then at the same time be building components for those outdoor classrooms. So there is a little bit of difference between primary and secondary. So we are building these at the middle schools as well as the high schools. You got to think in terms of primary is a more structured environment. We have very intentional components out there like music components and tables kind of locked into a place. We'll have easels that, you know, you can see through those easels, and it kind of encourages kids to interact and stuff. Whereas the high school, you know, the students are more self-regulated. So we're putting in, actually swings. We had sped department and Liberty High requested to put in a swing up there. We are strategic about where we put those. So Liberty High's on the north side, so they can look over to the ravine and they can see the prairie area, the wetland area, the forested area, and then it's right there by the student garden. And we extend the sidewalk out to connect with the garden. West High is in kind of courtyard for more of a central social atmosphere, but we also built it in mind so they could actually have outdoor performances. So they can actually set on their stadium seating, country stadium seating that's out there, and then it looks onto essentially garden with that outdoor classroom space.
The Liberty one's awesome. Like if you have a chance, just walk behind them. Tool on our side, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. I couldn't capture it all in this photo, and this is
Yeah,
actually a construction photo, so this doesn't really do justice. So athletics, I actually come from an athletic field background. Most of my career has actually been in construction, renovation of new athletic fields. Let me back up here. So the fields, we actually have roughly 24 of those fields. I have kind of the breakdown of the usage. The usage is somewhat difficult to understand because we introduced soccer into the middle school. So fields that used to be practice fields are now also considered competition fields. I did break it into what's considered modern design and what's not modern design, and we'll go into that in a little bit. And then I also made note of how many of those are actually exceeding the expected life cycle. And a number of those are actually exceeding those. So we do think of athletic fields, you know, as the recreational side, but really, if you think of students and student development, those students that are still in high school are still perfecting those motor skills. And that's the way we kind of view it is you know, these athletic fields are there to help those students continue to develop and really kind of master those skills as they move up through high school. And it's not really there solely for that recreational side. And so that's something to keep in mind, but those green spaces are used for a number of different activities. There's all sorts of STEM activities going on there, science experiments, they do egg drop tests and parachutes and, you know, all those kind of different things. I know the drones have been out, and there's a lot of student involvement in those green spaces. City High, for example, that space is used heavily by the community. I know they have a soccer league that happens every Saturday or Sunday. Yeah, both days. And then every time you go out there, there's public out using those tracks. So these are kind of the public, that center, not necessarily center of attention, but it's a high profile area for the public to use and interact as much as it is for our actual students in that. So our athletic fields, you know, we use the wordage falling behind. We are behind on a number of those athletic fields. So what I tried to do is I tried to break it into kind of the main categories of subjects here on the right that make up athletic fields, and I'll go through each one of those. So a number of our fields, most of our fields actually have no drainage, and at least one of them has clay tile drainage. So what that is, that's the system that drains water off the field. So in Iowa, we have really good soil. So something like 90% of the water that hits the surface from the rain actually percolates through the soil. And so it actually makes its way into the soil, and we actually have to get that to drain out through tile lines and stuff. Any more athletic fields are usually built when you're talking high school level athletic fields, and even junior high athletic fields, they have tile lining. Most of ours actually don't actually have those tile lining. So if you think back to the previous slide where it talked about are we building these to modern standards, that's one of the big things. Irrigation, in the case of Bates, we actually have an obsolete irrigation system where we have to special order irrigation heads because we basically don't make them anymore. So when I went through college 20-some years ago, they didn't even teach about hydraulic irrigation at that time. And this is a hydraulic system. So the only reason why I knew how to actually work on a hydraulic system when I got here 10 years ago was because I had started in athletics when I was 14. And they still had a hydraulic system. So we actually keep an inventory of heads just in case that irrigation system starts failing, but we can't actually get those heads. Bates, another Another reality of Bates is if you think of a football field, you think it's rectangle, there's also those D areas on the end that are grass. We've actually had to shut down those, we don't irrigate those anymore because how old that system actually is. So a lot of the modern irrigation systems, there's water conservation built into the programming, so it's all run by digital, it's all run by your phone now. We can actually scale back water. We can also have weather systems installed on the fields that actually measure how much humidity there is, what the actual ambient temperature is, as well as what the rainfall is, and it calculates how much water is actually losing via the plant out of there. And it will automatically adjust that irrigation system accordingly. We don't have that. We have that, some of that up at Liberty High because it's brand new. City High does not have that. West High does not have those systems to actually get that accomplished. Grading, a number of our fields, there was absolutely no grading. So we know the long history of like Merchant One, for example. It was park space. They went out, they dug a hole, they put infield in there, and they called it a baseball field. We think something similar happened with West High some number of years ago. As far as Bates, we had a gentleman that worked for us for 42 years. And he gave us a rough data somewhere in the late 70s, but early 80s was the last time Bates was properly renovated. And that's where you go and you reestablish the crown of the field, the slopes of the field, replace the irrigation, you replace the tile line that's actually there. So the reality of Bates Field is it's 40 years old, 40 plus years old. I'm 46. So if you think about that, my parents played on the exact same field without any sort of upgrades to it. So the other sobering thing is when it gets into that laser grading, we have elementary schools that have been laser graded. And so these fields are not ever built professionally laser graded.
When you say laser graded, what does that mean for anybody listening?
So laser grading is essentially like modern laser grading. Is you take the architectural plans and you put them into a GPS thing. And that GPS then connects with the blade on the front of the bulldozer, and it will actually raise and drop and pitch that blade to get it within plus or minus 1 to 2% for our athletic fields. So if you think of West High soccer field as laser graded, Liberty High, you think of those fields are laser graded, so you can think of how smooth those actual surfaces are. So that happens on our elementary schools. So all of our elementary schools are actually laser graded. There's our some of our high school athletic fields have been laser graded today. So to get even more into the weeds on that, modern athletic fields, you can actually control how hard the surface is. And so when you go and you actually renovate a field, we have a measure of how much that needs to compact to get a certain amount of hardness to it to make sure that there's stability for the students to actually play, but there's the minimum amount of impact injury. That has not been done to any of our fields. These fields, although it may seem extravagant, fields like this are built regularly at small elementary or small school districts all over Iowa. So this is something you would expect to see if you were to go to Solon or West Range or some of those other fields. So we are absolutely lagging behind in the realm of athletic fields.
Talk a little bit about the historic nature of Bates and how that complicates what we try to do.
Yeah.
You talked about the track and you talked about the field, but talk about them together and kind of how that footprint,
Yeah.
we want to maintain it, but then it adds to what we're trying to or need to do.
So the challenge with athletic fields, and when we think of in terms of Bates, we know that some Bates are actually failing on the tracks. Particularly Bates, the asphalt's actually failing. What's happening is there's so much asphalt's failing, and it's kind of heaving and it's pulling apart like this, which is causing that rubber to fall apart. If we were to go in to replace just the track, we're going to be a third in on that football field to just replace the foundation of the track, just to have available space in that. If we were to go in,
Okay.
if we were to go in and replace the field and get it to the levelness that we actually wanted, that track has to be level as well, because you're talking, a quarter of an inch difference, and you spread it over how many feet is how much difference by the time you get to the other track or other end of the field. And so when you go in and renovate like a football field with natural turf and you're trying to renovate a track, you pretty much have to do that at the exact same time. So on top of that, then you throw in the fact that you have irrigation that has to send in the irrigation lines underneath that track, and you have to throw in tile that's underneath that track. all those activities have to be coordinated together, so you can't really piecemeal this together. And so to put it in perspective, another way to think of it is when we're trying to control the hardness and firmness of the actual soil, we use part of deep air fighter, and it goes in and it punctures holes in the ground, but what it also does is kicks back like this and kicks, and it actually shatters the soil throughout the soil profile. We can't use that on some of these systems. Bates is one of them. We don't have architectural plans that tell us where those lines are, so we can only go in 6 inches instead of 12 or 14 inches. And for like City High softball, which is actually a very beautiful field, I'm surprised it's as beautiful as what it is. We've had to go in and install the irrigation this first couple of years here. We ran into some sort of old buried building that has square nails. And we're digging chunks of this building out to try to get the irrigation in. This isn't like feet underground, this is inches underneath the surface. So what that means to us is we can only get those fields so good. You have to have that base, you have to have that foundation. And that's kind of all has to be packed.
And I think,
Is that what you're at?
I think your point too was, well, two things. Well, one thing, Bates is really unique.
Yeah.
It's in a bowl. Track is more oblong than what most tracks, so it's narrow areas, so we do get the water in there. But the other thing, I think the point is, to build a house, you have to start with the foundation. You know, you don't build the walls and then come back 2 years later and put in the foundation. So to do everything right, we have to start at the bottom and do everything at once.
Exactly. Did I answer your question? So just a quick update on prairies. Prairies are ongoing. Really what we're trying to do is create natural spaces, both for the environment as well as education spaces. A lot of students go out, they collect seeds, they do plant counts to see what the density of native plants are or flowers are, and then elementary kids take those seeds and they make little mud balls with seeds in it, and then they take those and they'll actually help us propagate prairies, and so they're heavily involved in our prairie propagation. Currently, we have Weber that's underway. 2 years of drought has set us back. It's less than stellar right now. But we've pushed forward and we've kind of expanded into the list below. Prairies are kind of a multi-year thing. They kind of look terrible for the first couple of years and then they start coming to life after a couple of years. So
Can we get any little critters that live in our prairies that you have to deal with?
no, I have not witnessed any sort of increase in it. Wildlife does live in there. There's absolutely no doubt about that, but it hasn't created any sort of nuisance. And then, yeah, so there is bird watching that goes along with the prairies with some of those different clubs. There are bird clubs out there.
We just keep the wildlife here at the ESC, the turkeys, the
Right.
deer. Yeah. We don't need a prairie. We've got it all out there.
So we did that. That's a good point. That was a complaint we got was when we start putting in, people were concerned we want more raccoons, more possums, and we have never seen an increase in our schools. And like I told Molly, we don't burn them.
Right.
West High used to burn them. It's a disaster.
So Chase did mention awards. This is really kind of speaks to our grounds guys that are out there every day. Mike Murphy's the grounds lead. We got Dakota who's on athletics, and really this kind of speaks to the entire crew because the entire crew worked on the athletic fields. And really kind of recognizes the work they do. And I think if there was awards for playgrounds, we probably would have some by now. And some of those other guys would have gotten similar as well. So. Question?
So I'd like to say, keep in mind, we're just short of we're about 634 acres, 36 sites. And you think of people riding mowers. We have one of the best hardscapers around. He's fantastic. So the type of crew we have, 9 guys, I think, right? There's 9 people. It's a phenomenal amount of work they do. You go see the landscaping at the CFI, the landscaping out front here. I mean, and I drive around a lot throughout the state, and you'll go by a school and you'll look at that lawn, it's pristine. You drive by next time, you see somebody out there spraying. We have a really stringent IPM plan. they follow it. We have a great playground of policy. We follow it. I mean, these guys do an amazing job. So they really deserve a lot of praise.
They're both being very kind, but 9 people for 634 acres isn't really enough.
That's
Right,
correct.
I mean, and so that, you know, these guys are doing this with a, you know, skeleton crew of, you know, what it really should be to maintain that and see this level of success. And on the playgrounds one, it's kind of it is how a community should work too, right? Because we all know how we got to the playgrounds thing and that there were some strong advocates along the way. But then the institution took it and not only took it to meet a standard, but probably went above and beyond the standard, right? And made it really excellent. And so that's the thing, when you do have people advocate for change and then we can take it on and make it ours and then make it as successful as these guys have done, you know, big credit to them there too. But they're not gonna come in here and complain about staffing or any of that, but they are really limited in that area. And that's always a tough decision for us, right? About where we spend those dollars, and how to outfit and how to staff them. And they're busy doing snow removal unless it's this January, we don't have to do much of that right now. Although this morning was probably the place, they still had to move some stuff and get some parking lot salt and sprinkle.
Surprise,
So,
yeah,
Yeah,
a couple of those
yeah, we had like 3 of those.
where I looked
Yeah.
up, I'm like, wait, it snows?
Just enough to.
I got a notice from the city and I was like, oh no, so I jumped up that and heard it. So,
Open it up to questions.
You want to take questions now or wait till we get
Now it's probably a good time.
a couple of comments? One, I really appreciate the work that you're doing on playground services. As Matt said, that was an issue of great concern a few years ago or so. So your addressing that issue is really outstanding. This is a really good presentation. I've learned a lot. John was always through the trade condition, that level of innate knowledge. So the other thing I'm really interested in though is conveying how we're going to use outdoor classrooms. Athletics to me is fairly obvious how we're using how those are utilized in our overall instructional program. Outdoor classrooms fairly limited, at least to this district. But it's a thing that was asked for by students. In our input sessions, a few years ago, we started this project. So I'm not sure if the instructional use could be added to this kind of presentation, but I think instructional use is something of great interest in the community as a whole, and I suspect that the teachers have a lot to say about how they're going to incorporate outdoor classroom space into their teaching.
I mean, I can speak a little to Liberty. That location is right outside of the art rooms. And the industrial tech rooms are close by, so our, you know, culinary arts program is right there, and then also the music rooms have, you know, exit right to that area, and so and it connects right to the garden with the concrete path, and so I do know that the art students are out there a lot, you know, for their art classes. Digital art spends a lot of time out there. Music, I think, will start to use it. It has a little bit, not to the extent Westside does, but amphitheater, you know, effect. I think they're thinking some small group performances out. And their AP environmental science and earth and space science do experiments out there. And so that sort of landing area that you saw is a spot where they can go and they can sit and they can collaborate, and then they go off toward the garden, and there's the really nice there is a wetlands, and there's also that we're building paths around, and there's the wooded area. So they, I don't know what the experiments were, but they were conducting experiments where I saw things that were hanging for several months, and students would go out and they'd collect that and they'd come back in. So that particular area, you know, These for Liberty has, you know, it's got music, art, you know, science. It's right by social studies, so we'll probably go out. We won't be as creative as all of those folks will be, but we'll go out and use that just as a spot for students to sit and read and to have discussions. So it's awesome. I mean, I think the other thing too is that the industrial tech students in building a lot of these are being involved in the building process. It might be a different type of use for that, but it's, you know, sort of ongoing work for them. That was certainly the case. You can't see the garden picture of Liberty, but that was the case. That's how that garden got built, was through the industrial tech programs collaboration with Jenny was the art of the garden club person at that point, your FCS teachers. So really, I mean, it's awesome. It's just like, you know, for students, the cool thing is, and for teachers, it is an extension of the classroom. And it's different, so you're able to break up like the norm of your day where you're in the same room and you're outside, and you're doing something different, and you're really doing hands-on learning. And I think that's where a lot of kids really, do thrive, and I think the teachers it's invigorating, so. That's been the experience I've had at Liberty and what I've heard from colleagues. Too.
I'm sure there's similar experiences in the other
Yeah,
secondary schools as well as elementary schools. I'm really fascinated though about how elementary students react to the opportunity to be outside and doing their work.
yeah, and I would say a shout out to Ben and his team and to everyone, and Jeff and all the guys. The thing that's awesome is like they'll come in and just have conversations like, what would you like to be able to do? And it's sort of like say yes culture, it doesn't mean you're gonna get to do everything, but it's like, yeah, let's work together and try to envision this and see what we can do. And there isn't, there's our compliance issues we have, but it really is like, yeah, let's dream about this together and then get it done, which is a tribute to you guys' program.
So the way we really kind of approach it is we want it to be as open campus as possible, but we do want certain elements to appear in there. So we do know that we need to have some shade, ADA compliant picnic tables. We know that there's gonna be some sort of activity. We don't necessarily dictate what. And so like Liberty High, for example, they want standing art tables or standing science tables with plexiglass top where they can do any sort of number of creative things on there. And we don't really put any more structure than that into it. We do some sort of seating arrangement, like from that tiered seating, or in elementary schools, it might be rating boulders as the seating arrangement that you choose to do, but we try to leave it as open canvas as possible. And then within those committees, there's more emphasis on how the teachers are going to use it, as opposed to playgrounds where it's more kind of a vision of for like more structured play development and stuff. So.
In a conversation I had with one of our elementary principals, she reflected some of the things that Brady said about using that space for reading or activities, a change of scenery for them. But that's one of the things she wanted to focus on, Charlie, was how do they actually really incorporate that space specifically into some of the learning units, rather than making a space they could take what they might do in the classroom out there. It's still pretty new to her school. And so it's something that she was focused on too, is not just taking the learning in the space, but how do they turn that space into part of those curricular pieces. And even though we've been working on this, what we say, since 2020, in education years, that's still relatively new, especially if you talk about coming out of a pandemic and some of their changes. And so people are being creative and trying to look at it as a canvas and really utilizing the freedom, because they're not all the same. We worked with the topography of the different buildings, and so the classrooms look different based on where they are. And so it then does provide that uniqueness to each campus about how their principals and their teachers can then ultimately use them. So it's something we continue to encourage, but it's definitely a work in progress as they become more and more comfortable with those as academic spaces.
So some of the feedback that we're still trying to incorporate in there is schools wanted boulders or stumps in the hours of the clock going around, like the gazebo area, so they can use that as hands and clock. We also found a company that can do stamped compasses into the concrete. We'll probably go back and retrofit that in at a future date. Human compasses or human sundials or the other things that want like a centralized point that then their shadow would point to a given, like a set control point, I guess you could say. And there's one other thing that we've had requests for, and it's slipped my mind. I lost it. It's a cool thing we've had. It's important.
I think it used to be really for science, their investigations, so they're using them a lot of that. You also see kids at recess utilizing them. They'll play school out there and do it that way, or sometimes they're made to stage and they make their friends watch their performance while they're doing that at recess. But then teachers are just utilizing it also as an alternative to their classroom, as Brady was kind of sharing, and going outside and just replacing their learning environment, but they are utilizing it more and more for science. And then writing as well. So writing.
Actually, we haven't done a video on this one yet.
No, but that's a
Just
good
sitting here
idea.
thinking a compilation of these, but
Mhm. It would be cool.
I just thought it was a great presentation, so thank you both. Being here tonight. even though Sean's not here.
I have a couple questions myself. How often will, so I saw the, soon about ready to be done with the playgrounds. The playgrounds are done and now we're going back in. So are you just going straight along the timeline? When one was installed, and going back and check things out, or?
It's extremely complicated. So when I got here, there wasn't life cycle for the programs. So what I did was I worked with Craig Hansel at the time, and yeah, after we established, I think it was originally a 22-year life cycle. That was based on expected performance of the structures. That was the recommendation.
And parts,
In parts,
Because-
exactly.
like anything else, also you can't find parts after 10 years.
And just to back up even further, I think until, I think it was Craig made the decision, or as a team, we kind of decided to bring those playgrounds in-house. At first, they were all funded through PTOs,
Yes.
right? And so there was a decision, first of all, that the district's gonna take this on, right? It's gonna become a district responsibility, right? And then we kind of iterated to the concern about accessibility after that, and then, like he was talking about, establish that life cycle for us, but just, it wasn't that long ago that the district wasn't even providing playground.
So we kind of get at the heart of your question. It's now a 25-year life cycle, and what we found is 10 years into it, the designs are not upgrading as quickly as they used to. So if you think of, at least in my life, it was always a swing, a super high slide, a very fast slide, and the jungle gym. And just in that 40 years, then it switched to wooden structures, and now it's switched to modern structures. And now the modern philosophy is doing all inclusive or universal design, which is really talking about the mix of components versus new types of components. So what we're finding is our structures are aging like they're supposed to. So we have, and we think it's going to extend longer than 25 years. So instead of going back and ripping out structures that we can still buy parts for, we have this kind of grace period where we're hoping to catch up. And it's really just kind of whatever makes kind of the most efficient sense of getting back through those old schools and adding those different structures. And there's things that we try to do, well, let me give you an example. We knew that Alexander is one of those that didn't have the modern ADA, the universally designed playground. And we knew that they had a higher level of special needs students that need to get in there for mobility reasons. We reprioritized and moved them to the top of the list, and we actually got equipment in there ahead of some of those students. And so we try to be kind of conscientious of where that demand is. But it's certainly, we're looking at those older structures and the timing of when they're built compared to the modern ones. The other part to that is, even before we started adopting this universal design, there was different levels of universal design that naturally had already occurred. So there's some structures that might be newer than other ones that just happen to be more universally designed, even though that was not the original intent. So it's very much so a balancing act in trying to get through there. Now, the beauty of it is the structures themselves are not really the issue. It's all those other panels that are happening around the side. So these next 10 years, it's going to be a lot of adding different activities, activity panels, art panels, tactile panels for students on the spectrum, quiet places. So they're these kind of smaller standalones. We can actually get a lot more schools done at one time compared to in the past. So I don't know that I can give you a very straight direct answer. Yeah.
My other question is in regards to athletics and, so I know you mentioned something about the hardness of the field, right?
Yeah.
How hard, so I would assume that the harder the field is, the more likely students are to be injured on the field.
Yeah, I think there's probably science to support that, yeah.
So how hard, do we know how hard our fields are, these ones, like take baits if it hasn't been?
We have not done muscle tests specifically on our natural grass. We do it on our rubber fields because the synthetic fields will actually harden up as well. And it's actually a bigger concern than natural grass.
Yeah.
But I guess the way to think about it is they kind of are what they are. We can aerify those, we can soften them up a little bit, but if you go back and you were to renovate, you can control the parts of the soil that go in there that give you a better narrowed down target for firmness that actually goes in there. And then as they roll those fields out, they'll actually compact that to a certain test that's in there. But we haven't necessarily directly tested the firmness of the natural grass fields. And there's actually a difference between natural grass and synthetic, if you think of like firmness in that. And synthetic, you see more twist injuries as opposed to natural grass, you see more impact injuries. So there's a whole lot of science that we could get into all that. And we do it more so on the synthetic because it's a higher risk of things going wrong, if that makes sense.
But it's an interesting conversation we've been having. We had it 10 years ago with playgrounds when we picked what type of fall surface because of the different protection for injuries. And now we started to have it with athletics, and the balance is usability versus safety, because we know that if we use synthetic fields, you can use it when it's wet, you can put the band on in the morning, the football team, the soccer team, right? So there's just more usage. But there's this line of study coming out that it actually might be more injury prone for students than the natural grass. And so we have to, it's another factor that we hadn't really been considering, because we kind of started moving towards synthetic because of the versatility of it. But now if you've seen the NFLPA PSAs or other things, the sports leagues are all coming out and trying to move it back to natural grass because of safety concerns related with synthetic turf in some ways. So like everything else, it's always a balancing factor when we're talking about those different surface levels.
And that's what their educations are in, is natural turf.
Yeah.
So the question about, the testing, this is what majority of our guys have gone to school. They know how to take care of the field, and they do.
I think it's probably about half our guys have college degrees in sports turf or natural grass turf. So the other thing that Chase almost kind of hit on is, natural turf, you can go out there and you can renovate it, you can improve it pretty rapidly as far as the performance of it. The synthetic turf, it has a high performance, and then over time it'll actually start degrading. So that's what it is that we're actually monitoring, trying to keep track of. Whereas natural turf, to a limited capacity, you should stay somewhat level and steady as far as the performance of it. So,
And I think there's a misconception that natural turf costs a lot more to maintain than synthetic, and if you do it right, it does.
it'd be amazing if I had $1 million every team for
Yeah.
one synthetic or one natural turf field.
Are there any other questions or comments? I have a motion to adjourn.
Is that the last thing on the agenda?
Wait, it's my first time. No, yeah, the agenda setting, for the next operations committee. We're gonna have seasoned veterans here today.
Happy to help. Do we have a date or is it as needed?
Well, it'd be as needed. The thing we might just, instead of setting a firm one, the suggestion might be if we do get one of those reports back. Whether it's demographer, whether it's facility study or fine arts study. Or even if there'd be an opportunity to talk about just athletic needs as an extension of this one, if we, since we have that athletic study complete and a plan on that, just to maybe take that piece for some education of the whole board on that before we get those other studies back as we start to put this puzzle together. So that would be what I would suggest, maybe as a follow-up for February is a piece of that. So we can stay close on what that might be.
Now do I have a motion?
So move.
Second.
All in favor of agreement? All against? Motion, well.